On average, one top 4 team from one year misses out on the 8 the next year. In my case in this video, be prepared. I do have 2 teams that made the top 8 last year that are missing out on this video, but those 2 are both top 4 teams from last year. So there's your little warning. I also have opinions that differ from a lot of other people. Historically, I do very well on my season predictions before the season starts. A lot better than most people, as anyone who's been a long time subscriber of mine will be able to confirm. For the record, before we get started, I am a Richmond supporter, because people like to accuse me of supporting certain teams in the comments section, as what people do on literally every ladder prediction. These are very unbiased predictions, so yeah, and it's pretty clear that Richmond will be pretty high on the ladder in most people's predictions, so don't be surprised when that happens. So anyway, let's just get right into it. Now the Wooden Spooners finishing in 18th. I have Hawthorn. Now every rebuilding team tends to have that time where they just bottom out. And I think this year Hawthorn are going to bottom out. They have traded away a lot of experience in Tom Mitchell, Jager O'Meara and Jack Gunston. So that's a clear indicator that Hawthorn are definitely in a full-on rebuild. This year is going to be about developing young talent, and in terms of list strength, I think they're definitely the weakest list in the league right now. Although I don't think they're the worst list, but in terms of right now, they're the weakest and most likely to finish on the bottom. I do think their future is better than the team that's I'm about to mention that's above them, but I can see Hawthorn winning maybe 3 games this year. Anyway, into 17th, I have the West Coast Eagles. Now, obviously the Eagles, they really fell from grace last season. People can blame COVID, people can blame injuries, but even when they were full strength, they just simply couldn't win. Only winning 2 games last season. I can see them winning maybe 3-4 games at best this season as well. They have lost Josh Kennedy to retirement. They have so many older players on their list that are injury prone. And they don't have very many players that are in the 25 to 27 age range or whatever. Also, their young talent I don't rate at all. I think they have pretty poor young talent, so I think they're in for a very long rebuild, the Eagles. I'm expecting another very bad season from them in 2023. In 16th, I have St Kilda, one of the most overrated teams over the last 5 years. They're always hyped up, but always disappoint. The main reason why I have them so low on this ladder is because they have a lot of injuries going into this season, mainly to their forward line, so I don't think they're going to be kicking too many big scores, that's for sure. St Kilda are known as the most self-destructive club in AFL history. That's definitely true. They continue to sack coaches and bringing new ones that aren't really that much better. You know, they've brought back Ross Lyon, who's arguably one of the worst coaches in AFL history. Just because he's been the coach of some good teams doesn't mean he's a good coach himself. He still has 0 premierships to his name. Even if he does finally get it right, he's not going to do it in year 1. St Kilda's list is average at best, plus they don't really have that much of a future considering they've wasted salary cap and draft picks on players like Brad Hill, who are just average, who they severely overrated. Although I think St Kilda's overall team is better than a 16th place finish, but I do think they will have a bad year this year due to injuries and due to the fact they have just got a new coach, so I think team chemistry won't be too good for them. In 15th, I have North Melbourne. Now, I predicted them to be better last year, but they weren't. But this year should be the year that they're better. Obviously, another year of development in their young players. They do have a decent young team, to be fair. They have brought in a few more players. They're average players, but they'll help with depth and all of that. Also, you never know, because those average players have come from decent teams, and they could really improve with a worse team. Also, they now have Alistair Clarkson as their coach. We all know how good of a coach he is, and he always has something up his sleeve. North Melbourne, they will produce a few upsets this year, and they will improve. They're still in a rebuilding phase. They still need a few years before they'll become relevant again. But I do think things are going to get a little bit better for North Melbourne in the next few years, starting this year. In 14th place, this one's going to be a bit controversial. I have the Gold Coast Suns. Now, people are predicting Gold Coast to rise or to at least be where they are because they do have some decent young players, but I'm predicting them to fall a little bit. There's always something that happens with the Suns, you know, injuries or players just not living up to the hype. They did lose Rankin, who I think is really important for them. Matt Rowell is always hyped up, but he either gets injured or just simply doesn't live up to it. They're an average team, and I feel like there's other teams that will improve that I think will just overtake them. So that's why I've got the Suns in 14th. In 13th, I have Essendon. Now, Essendon are a weird one. Like, I can definitely see Essendon making the 8, but I feel like the best I can see them doing is sneaking into the 8, getting knocked out first week of the finals. They're not going to be relevant. I do think in a couple of years' time, they could be relevant and, you know, start winning some finals because it's been 19 years now this year since they have won a final. But they've just never been able to put together a strong enough list to be able to compete with decent teams. Also, they keep sacking their coaches as well, a bit like St Kilda, self-destructive. They've brought in, who is it, Brad Scott, who is not that good of a coach either. He's not going to turn them around, especially not immediately. Essendon do have some decent players such as Darcy Parish, Zach Merritt, and they have some decent young players coming through, but those young players just aren't quite developed enough or at the age where they'll start being really good at this level. Essendon are always really up and down. On their day, they can beat some good teams, but at their worst, they can lose to some really garbage teams. Like, for example, last year beating Sydney, a team who made the grand final, and then they lose to West Coast, who was a joke last year. That's the kind of team Essendon are, just so hard to predict. In 12th, I have the Adelaide Crom. Now, most people had them a little bit lower, but I think they're going to improve. They don't have that many stars. That's their thing. Like, how many A graders do they have? Any A graders they have, or that they used to have either dropped off due to injury or just being old, such as Rory Sloane. Taylor Walker still does pretty well, but he's well into his 30s now. Any year, any time, he can start to regress. Their young players are solid, but do they have superstar Stark potential? Most of them have potential to be above average, but not really stars or superstars, but you never know. I think Rankin's the only one that I can think of that will at least be a star or a superstar in the next couple of years. I think they'll keep improving, but they're not quite ready for finals yet. I know they want to get back into finals and all that, but I think they need another year or two minimum. Now, these next 3 predictions are going to be super controversial, so feel free to have your cry in the comments. In 11th, most people have this team as Wooden Spooners, but I have the GOS Giants in 11th. So here's the reason why. Now, I originally had them as Wooden Spooners as myself, but thinking about it now, surely the Giants aren't going to be that bad because I think they're going to surprise some people. Leon Cameron was a pretty bad coach. They've got a new coach, Adam Kingsley, who was known as a pretty good assistant over at Richmond. I think he's going to make some changes and he's going to give the GWS Giants a chance of making the 8. And if you look at their list, it's not really that bad. They've got some decent players, you know. They've still got Tom Green, who I think is a future Brownlow medalist. Toby Green does good as well. They've got a pretty decent defense, you know, Sam Taylor, Nick Haynes, guys like that. Their forward line is the main issue. You know, who have they got really other than Toby Green and Harry Himmelberg? I think they're going to be better than what everyone thinks, and they're going to surprise a few people. So that's why I have them in 11th. Now we're moving on to 10th, and this is going to make a few people cry. Not as much as the next team, but I have the Sydney Swans finishing 10th. Now, they definitely were out of their league when it came to getting into the grand final. Like, there was no way they were ever going to win that, although I was hoping they would, but there was no way they were going to win that. To be fair, they probably should have choked against Collingwood. They shouldn't have even been versing Collingwood, to be fair. Collingwood should have had a home preliminary final because they were robbed against Geelong in the qualifying final due to match fixing. And if you don't believe me, look up Collingwood versus Geelong qualifying final, match fixing. You'll see a video proving that that game was rigged. Geelong only managed to win their game by 6 points despite the umpires cheating to make sure they win. Sydney very lucky to get past Collingwood. Not only that, it's the getting smashed in a grand final curse. Just think about it. Teams that get smashed in a grand final drop off big time. Usually the exact year they lose. Western Bulldogs 2021 barely made the 8, should not have made the 8. You can make an exception for Geelong in 2020. 2019, GWS Giants missed the 8 the next year. 2018, Collingwood, an embarrassing loss. They finished 17th just 2-3 years later. You know, it's not an immediate drop off, but they definitely did drop off dramatically. 2017, Adelaide Crom made grand final, were clear favourites, got smashed, haven't made the final since. Won the wooden spoon 3 years later. It's a curse, I'm telling you. That's one of the reasons why I have Sydney missing the 8, because it tends to happen almost all the time. Number 9 is going to make some people cry. And in 9th spot, I have last year's premiers who did not deserve it. Geelong. Now Geelong are definitely the worst premiership team since the Western Bulldogs of 2016. They only won due to match fixing, although the grand final itself wasn't rigged. Obviously Geelong were clearly better than Sydney, but the AFL made it so Geelong would have an easy run to the grand final. The AFL did not want Richmond or Collingwood winning it. Like, they knew Richmond and Collingwood were the most likely teams to go on to win the flag that year. And Melbourne were a pretty good chance as well, but somehow Melbourne lost to Sydney. Honestly, I didn't watch that game, but it probably was rigged. I can see that being rigged. I stopped watching the final series because the first game of the final series was when my Richmond got robbed against Brisbane. That was clear match fixing because Tom Lynch kicked a goal and they called it a point. They also did that to Collingwood in the 2002 grand final. Anthony Rocker kicked a goal, but they called that a point. And that ended up robbing Collingwood the premiership in 2002. My dad, a massive Collingwood supporter, threw a cake when that happened, this massive cake. So Geelong cheated to win the 2022 qualifying final. To be fair, it was the umpires. However, Geelong have been known to try and cheat themselves. 2020 grand final, Patrick Dangerfield dog-shotted Nick Voston, and then this year, Tom Sniper, or Tom Stewart, whatever the fuck, he dog-shotted Dion Prestia, which got Geelong a goal, which was the only reason they won that game against Richmond. They only won by 3 points, so that dog shot was the direct reason that Geelong won that game, so that is definite cheating from Geelong. Now, in terms of quality, they're worse than the 8 teams above them, because they're very lucky to have won anything last year. They shouldn't have, because they weren't the best team in the league. They were maybe the 4th or 5th best team. And you'd expect them to drop off because they're old as hell. People might say, oh, they had a really good trade period. No, they didn't. They had one of the worst trade periods. Watch my trade period video where I analysed everything. You know, they got that Henry from Collingwood. He's not really going to get a game for them, is he? Also, Bose from the Giants. He's not really going to play that much. He's dropped off big time the last couple of years. Now, I expect Dangerfield to drop off. They've had Selwood retire. Expect all their players to drop off a little bit. That's all that it needs, and you know, so many teams can overtake them. I'm expecting so many teams to be better this year. You know, the top 8 teams that I have, you know, they're going to improve. Whereas Geelong are just going to get worse. There's no way they're getting better. But anyway, let's just move on to the top 8. In 8th, it won't be that much of a surprise to you, but I have Collingwood. Now, Collingwood are expected to drop off a little bit because they obviously overachieved last year. However, they were in some really good form and really should have beat Geelong, should have beat Sydney. However, you can't just keep relying on getting lucky, you know, few point wins against bad teams as well. They were doing that against teams like Adelaide, Gold Coast. You know, you can't rely on that. It's not sustainable, and they're eventually going to start losing that. Collingwood will still be a decent team, don't get me wrong, but there won't be, you know, a top 4 team. They have some decent young talent, so they are going to be top 8 team for quite a while, I reckon. But I'm expecting a bit of a drop-off. Teams are going to start countering Craig McRae's game plan, just like teams started doing that with Richmond after a while. Dimmer was able to make some tweaks to the game plan to counter other teams' counters, Will Craig McRae be able to do that? I'm sure he will eventually, but Collingwood, they overachieved last year. They're not as good as their last year's ladder prediction. And I think 8th is about where they'll be. In 7th, I have Port Adelaide. Port Adelaide missed the 8 last year. They started 0-5, a really bad start to the year, and they could never come back from that. But this year, they'll have a better season. They're too good of a team to miss the 8 again, surely. Ken Hinkley's a terrible coach, that's why they always underachieve. Or even if they do go on to make the top 4, they choke because Ken Hinkley is a terrible coach. But they have a lot of talent on the team, you know, well-balanced lists. Good old players, good, you know, middle-aged players, and some decent young players as well. We should get them back in the top 8. You know, they have the runs on the board, so I'm confident they will make top 8. The team that's next on the ladder, though, I'm not as confident about, but should surely make it. So in 6th position, I have Carlton. Now, Carlton have not made finals in 10 years. They should have made finals last year. Like, how in the fuck did they not? They were 8-2. Halfway through the season in the top 4. Like, how do you fuck that up? Whenever Carlton were under any serious pressure, they faltered. You know, against Melbourne, they managed to lose that game when they pretty much had it in the bag. They lost to Collingwood when they led by 4 goals halfway through the last quarter. They had that game in the bag, but they somehow choked that. I mean, they choked big time last year. It's one of the most monumental chokes you can ever see. You know, I thought Melbourne's choke back in, what was it, 2017, when they somehow lost to Collingwood. I thought that choke when they pretty much had the finals in the bag was bad, but boy, this one was worse. They managed to choke so many weeks in a row. And they lost to Adelaide, who are not a very good team somehow. And that obviously really put their confidence down. But surely, like, they have such a good team, you know. How in the hell can they not make the finals this year? They've got to, surely. I mean, they have really good key forwards. You know, they've got Curnow and Mackay. Their small forwards aren't as good, but, you know, their tall forwards should get it done for them. They have a decent midfield, you know. Cripps, who's severely overrated, you know, but he's still alright these days, even though the Brownlow was rigged, by the way. Sam Walsh, who's a superstar, he's their best player, not Cripps. Sam Walsh is definitely their best player. Hewitt goes alright as well. Their backline is pretty deep as well. Really good backline. So they should be a good team this year. There's no reason as to why they shouldn't. In 5th, I have the Western Bulldogs. Now, the Western Bulldogs have arguably one of the best lists in the league, but their backline is pretty weak. That's the problem with them. So they do concede big scores, however they can score pretty big as well, because they have an unbelievable midfield. But the problem is they did lose Josh Dunkley, which is a big blow to them, one of their best players. But they still have Bontempelli and all of that, McRae, who are just absolute superstars, and should be able to get them at least into 5th. I can definitely see them winning the premiership as well. They almost won it in 2021. There was obviously some chemistry issues last year, which is why they were so bad. But maybe Josh Dunkley was the main reason why, maybe. He's been acting like a dickhead over the last few years, you know, crying, wanting to leave. I don't get why, because he's playing for one of the better teams in the league. But he finally gets his wish with Josh Dunkley gone. I reckon that could fix some of their chemistry issues. So the Bulldogs should have a pretty good season this year. In 4th, I have the Fremantle Dockers. Now, Fremantle rose into the top 8 last year from basically being mediocre for like 5-6 years. But they've got some really good young talent that's starting to come through. And they've brought in Luke Jackson as well, which is a huge in for them. They've got 2 really good young ruckmen who are going to be superstars. You know, people talking about Gawn and Grundy. But what about Jackson and Darcy? You know, they're going to be really dominant for them, potentially over the next 8 or so years. Fremantle are going to be a top team for a very long time, the way I see it, with Brayshaw and all of them. I don't think they'll quite win the premiership yet, but I definitely think they're a top 4 caliber team now. And I wouldn't be surprised if their first premiership happens in the next couple of years, and maybe that starts a dynasty. Who knows? So in 3rd, I have Richmond, my team. Now, with the inclusions of Tim Taranto and Jacob Hopper, Richmond have some really good depth in the midfield now. If you look at their team, it's a super strong team, a really deep team. Got a lot of decent young talent coming through as well, especially considering, you know, how good Richmond have been over the last 5-6 years. Winning 3 premierships, still managed to be able to develop some players into stars. You know, where Noah Bolter wasn't part of 2017 team. Neither was Shea Bolton. Now they're both absolute guns, especially Shea Bolton. I think he is a future Brownlow medalist. Hopefully Dusty is back to his best as well. He missed a lot of last season and quite a bit of 2021 as well. Hopefully he's back, and if he's pretty close to his best, you know, he's gonna really dominate. I think he's gonna play a lot more up forward now that we have a way deeper midfield. You know, Prestia, he did get injured in the practice match. Hopefully he's there for round 1, but that would have been a huge loss 1 year ago, but this year it's not as bad because we've got replacements. Key's position, though, is a bit of concern. With if Rewald or Lynch get injured, you know, maybe Miller could be a key forward. And also in the back line, you know, we've got Gibcus injured for at least the first month. And also Terrence having trouble with his hip, so who's going to play there? Will Miller go back into the back line? Or are we going to bring in Tyler Young, who hasn't played a game yet? It does get thin in the back line if we get injuries to key position players. However, we're pretty deep everywhere else. And there's a lot of star power in this team as well. A lot more than most teams. So that can itself can get us over the line. And I think Richmond will be a premiership contender in 2023. In second, I have Melbourne. Melbourne somehow got knocked out in straight sets. Had to be rigged, to be fair. No way they lost to Brisbane legitly. I didn't watch the game, but it's just no way Brisbane are nowhere near as good as Melbourne, at least last year. You know, I'm saying that, and the only team I haven't mentioned on this ladder is Brisbane. So, yeah, but Brisbane will be better this year, obviously, but they weren't that good last year. Melbourne's inclusions, you know, they've brought in Lockie Hunter, which no one's been talking about. Grundy as well, like Gordon Grundy, you know, 2 superstar ruckmen in the same team. Like, how crazy is that? And one of them's going to be playing forward for half the time. Not only that, if they're fully healthy, they've got Tom McDonald, Ben Brown. Both of them, they used to be stars, but they have dropped off, but they're still decent enough players to be problems for the opposition. And not only that, they've got Bailey Fritsch, who's turned into a gun. So it's going to be a matchup nightmare for most teams. They have a really good defense and an awesome midfield. They've got Oliver, Viney, Petrarca. Like, who's going to stop them? They win a lot of contested ball. They're just a tough team. Teams are going to have serious problems with them this year. If they're not grand finalists, I'll be surprised. Now, moving on to the minor premiers. I have the Brisbane Lions. Now, Brisbane, they constantly cheat. They cheated against Richmond in the elimination final. Brisbane, they weren't that good last year. They were, at best, you know, an eliminated first round caliber sort of team. But this year, they're definitely a premiership caliber team due to their inclusions. They've brought in Josh Dunkley, who's an absolute superstar. They've also brought in Jack Gunston, who is still pretty good, although he's older. Is pretty good still. And think about that forward line of Danaher, Hipwood, and Gunston. That's going to cause some serious problems. They've also got a really good defense and a very good midfield. You know, they're going to be a massive problem. Also, due to the father-son bullshit, they have one of the best prospects in Australia, in Ashcroft, who may or may not get a game for them. With the fact that over many years the AFL have been allowing them to cheat the salary cap and all the rigged matches that they're benefiting off of, they're definitely going to be on top, especially with a team like that. Although I don't think they're the best team. Melbourne are definitely the best team in terms of talent, but the AFL will find a way. They always do. Alright, so here's the team who I think will win the premiership. I have Melbourne winning the premiership. Just looking at their list, I think they're the best team in the league. So Melbourne to win the premiership in 2023. And runners up, I have Brisbane, because the AFL will do their best to make sure Brisbane make the grand final. Plus, they're a pretty good team. So I'm going to have them as the runners up. And, you know, I think they'll find it hard to beat Melbourne at the MCG even with match fixing going on. Hopefully Gil McLaughlin's gone by then and the next CEO isn't corrupt. But he probably will be, because the reason why Gil McLaughlin's still hanging around is because he's probably training up the next CEO to rig matches. That's what he's probably doing. Now, Brownlow medalist, I have Marcus Bontempelli. He's just a gun. And he looked pretty good during pre-season. I think he's in for a big year, so I've got him as the Brownlow medalist. Common medalist, I have Tom Lynch. He's clearly the best key forward in the league. He should have won it last year if it wasn't for injury. And it was a joke that he wasn't in the All-Australian squad. More proof the AFL is rigged and anti-Richmond. Rising star, I have Harry Sheezel. Apparently he was really good in the practice matches. And also, I don't expect Cadman to be that good. And I don't expect Ashcroft to play every game. But Sheezel, I think will. And I feel like he's most likely to be the best rookie. The Norm Smith medalist, I have Clayton Oliver. So I'd expect him to have a 40 disposal game in a grand final like that. He tends to do that, and I have him winning the Norm Smith medal. So those are my official 2023 ladder predictions. Tell me yours in the comment section down below. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe for more every content like this. Be sure to click the thumbs up button and leave a like on this video. Also be sure to join my Discord server. It is called Australian Sports Community. Link to that is in the description. Also be sure to subscribe to my second YouTube channel. It is called Stoody Archives. Link to that is also in the description. Also be sure to follow me on my other social media accounts. I have Instagram, I have Twitter, and I also have TikTok. The username for all of those is StoodyYT, and links to all of those will also be in the description. I hope you all had a good day, and I'll see you all in the next video.